of my story, I thought it would be nice to actually first also ask a question to you. And for that, I hope everybody also has a cell phone close at hand. I wanted to ask you all a question, and this also helps Ruben and I to focus in our story. I hope you all can see the Mentimeter and are a little bit familiar with how that works. So you can go to www.menti.com and you could use the code that's in the screen. So it's 91767350. Maybe James can also put it in the chat. And we have two questions. So the first one is, which opportunities do you see to improve bike-to-train connectivity in District 4 or maybe in Florida in general? So really curious where you think is the most opportunity for improvement. If people are having trouble to work with Menti, you could also always put your comments in the chat. Yeah, there's the first one, of course, a very important one, the first and last mile, where we're definitely going to talk about today. Yes, it's about the station and the trail, how we can make more out of that. We're going to talk about today, how we can address specific areas where people are living with lower incomes. I think an important point as well. And also the quality of the transit system itself, kind of the type of rail connections, the quality of the connections is really important. And of course, more facilities like the El Rio Trail, it's really important for people to make it easy to get to and from the station. And it's of course also a lot about cooperation. So you need a lot of different partners involved to make the integration of bike and train a success, and we're definitely going to address that as well. So I already see that you see a lot of things that still need to happen, and I think this will be central in our discussion today. We're definitely going to address a lot of these issues. I'm going to move to the next question that we had. Let me see. It's not moving. Let me see if I can do it like this. And that, of course, is what is your most important question for us today with respect to bike-to-train connectivity? What is your most urgent thing you would like to know from us and want us to talk about today? Yes, what can we do tomorrow? Always very important. What are the quick wins or the things we could start with this year? But also the long-term solutions. So what is the whole picture? Kind of all the important aspects of the bike-train connection. We're definitely going to talk about that. Of course, related to the type of infrastructure that is needed. How to get officials on board? That might also be an interesting question to address at the discussion at the end. So what is really needed to convince officials, which of course is very important to also get these projects funded. Course, the relationship also with the data collection, showing that these interventions are working, and also increasing the ridership. And of course, also interesting kind of how we get people out of their cars. It's only build it and they will come, or do we need to do more? I think it's very important. How we deal with new train stations. If we could make an ideal situation, how would we design the whole area? But of course, we also have a lot of, I also saw that how do we deal with existing stations where already a lot of the land use and the infrastructure is fixed. A lot of great questions. We will try to do our best to answer most of them. And please, if we haven't addressed your question at the end, also feel free to, during the discussion or in the chat, ask your question again. But there's already a lot of interaction, and we hope to keep that alive during the workshop. I think if you still want to fill in questions, you can, but I will now go back to my presentation, and I have to switch screens again. Because as I said in my introduction, we think that the bike and train, they in potential are the most perfect couple in transportation planning. And I will discuss three aspects related to this. So a little bit of theory. I'm going to talk a little bit about the network design. So this is more about the first and last mile, also how you get with your bicycle to and from the station. Then I will focus the second part of my talk a little bit more on the station area design. My talk will be a little bit more conceptual on a general level, and Ruben will also dive a little bit more into the details of certain aspects. So what is so interesting about the bike train combination is that it offers you you could say the best of both worlds. So on the one hand, you have the door-to-door flexibility that the bicycle offers. It gets you from your doorstep to another doorstep. But on the other hand, you combine this with the high speeds and also the reliability of a frequent transit network. And in that sense, this combination of bike and train is actually the only, you could say, combination that in terms of its characteristics actually can compete with the private vehicle, with of course the added benefit of being much more sustainable, much more healthy, and so on. And it's very important to note that, especially if you think about improving transit, there's often a lot of attention on the quality of the transit system itself, about frequency. But actually, if you look at an average transit trip, about 70% of the time, people are not in the transit vehicle. They are going to and from the station, so your first and last mile, but it's also about transferring and waiting at the stops. So actually, if you want to improve your transit connectivity, actually you have to put a lot of focus on these other aspects as well. And that's why this connection of walking and biking to the station, but also the quality of your station environment is so tremendously important. And often the solutions attached to this are also cheaper than running trains more frequently, because we know, of course, that is very expensive, or expanding your rail capacity. So it's really important to look at the whole picture. And of course, the added benefit of looking at this bike to train connectivity is that your catchment area of your transit system is much bigger if you combine transit with cycling than if you could combine transit with walking. This is a very simple map I made for the three stations next to close to Boca Raton, and you immediately see the enormous difference in catchment area of these stations. And this also means that it's not only about getting with your bike to the station, but you also have to think about, for example, bike share facilities at the destination, so that also in the last mile people have a bigger catchment, and this in the end increases the catchment of the whole of the system. And it's also really important to note that the bicycle works better with higher order transit. It may seem very obvious, but of course, if your buses are running really slow and stopping at every corner, then it doesn't make a lot of sense for people to bike to the bus stop. And it's of course quicker for them to do the whole bike ride from A to B. So especially cycling works well in terms of integration with rail and also with bus rapid transit. And it has an added benefit that if you have a really well connected bus and bike, for example, if you have a fast running bus system, it makes it more attractive to bike to the bus. But it can also mean that you have to let the bus stop not as often. So this increases the speed of the bus, increases the cost effectiveness of the bus, and also leads to higher ridership. So it makes the overall system more competitive. Of course, you have to think about what does this mean for people who cannot walk or cycle that far to a bus, maybe elderly people. And of course, you need some kind of paratransit to supplement this. But especially if you think about bike and transit integration, it's about higher order transit. I talked about the catchment areas here. So here you see the difference with numbers from the Netherlands. So if you think about a light rail stop, your catchment area can be 3,200 meters, which is about 2 miles on the origin side, and maybe just under a mile on the destination side. Whereas for a bus, this catchment area is much smaller. In terms of your network strategy, and I looked more towards the North American context, because in our older cities the spatial structure it's much different. What I see often is that in America you have these big arterials and they connect the different parts of the city, but there's no local connection between these different parts of the city. So cyclists also have to take these arterials to get from A to B the fastest. But of course, these are not very attractive places for people to cycle. Even when there are bike lanes on these arterials, you do not feel very safe riding on a road with 6 lanes and with pretty high speeds. So in terms of your network, and of course that's especially what the El Rio Trail does, is you need to create new connections for cycling, kind of within this bigger grid, where they have their own corridor. This can be a green corridor. It could also be a quiet residential corridor, like a bicycle boulevard. And in the end, you want to go for these types of connections. I can also imagine that it's not always easy to make these connections everywhere, but these are really corridors that invite people to cycle. And if you want to increase the competitive advantage of cycling, you would also maybe discourage local connections through connections for cars. So the cars always have to use the arterials, whereas actually you give cycling a competitive advantage by making these through connections. We always say in the end that the best bicycle plan is also a very good car network plan. Of course, in most of the North American context, you would say this would ideally mean you would like to separate. So you would like to separate your cycling infrastructure from these main arterials and maybe take a parallel route. But sometimes, of course, especially more in the downtown areas, but maybe also surrounding a station, it could also maybe mean a mixture with lower speeds, especially where you have denser areas. So the older main streets or more mixed use areas where most destinations are along these corridors, it makes more sense to mix cycling also with the bus and also with the car. But of course, then you have to reduce the speed, and you could think about adding bike lanes. And then, of course, in terms of the integration with the bus or with transit, you have these maybe separate bike corridors, and then, of course, you can make through connections to the bus stops on these higher order arterials. And I looked a little bit at the comprehensive 2020 plan for Boca Raton, and I already see some of these like in between the grid like new connections that are proposed. And I think these are excellent kind of corridors to work on. But of course, there are more you could think about. How can we connect, for example, to the mall from the eastern part of the city underneath the highways? Kind of these connections, because these main infrastructure corridors, these interstates, are of course big barriers. And can we think about more of these connections? But also some of these existing not major arterials or collectors, can we maybe slow the speeds and maybe do kind of a road diet there, that we make these connections within the bigger grid more attractive for cycling, maybe with lower speed limits and less lanes for cars. So this is really like the network approach. How are we going to get to and from the stations and to and from the different areas in the city? And of course, as you're working on, and was showed by Alyssa, of course, you need to think about what to do when we cross these big arterials. So what is the maximum waiting time for cyclists? Maybe a wait time predictor. And a fun example from a Dutch city where they have this traffic light showing a bunny. And when the bunny is on, you know you have to speed up to catch the traffic light. And when it shows a cow that lies in the grass, you know you have to slow down a bit. And of course, the most ideal situation would actually be to make these underpasses, because this creates the fastest and safest connection. When you also look at the El Rio Trail, what I noticed is that the trail itself is beautiful and I think very well done. But of course, trails need feeders. And you need to get to and from the trail. So in the Netherlands, we would expect like every quarter, every third mile, you would at least have a local connection to the trail. And I noticed that there are still kind of lots of opportunities that are missed here. And of course, you need to think about, can we make these type of feeders, combine this with bike parking, and also maybe connect to bus stations to the corridor running parallel. And of course, sometimes this might be difficult. You don't have a right of way, but yeah, challenge these business improvement districts or local communities and let them know that they maybe can apply for funding to actually make these new connections. Work also with not only on the infrastructure, but also travel demand management with businesses along these corridors, and maybe invite them to make these connections. I'm going to first show this one. So this just from Google Maps. So at the moment you have this trail, but there's no connection with where people are living. So maybe if we just make these small interventions, make a bike rack, big difference, and you have an extra entry point to the trail. Doesn't have to cost very much. I just wanted to highlight for people that want to know more that as Goudappel we have a simple tool called Move Meter, because most North American cities, they don't have a transport model including cycling, but this is actually a simple model that can show the impacts of cycling policy on the car network using data from local transport models that we can implement, and then we could show, okay, if we make a network, as I just explained, what are the impacts, for example, on the car network? And we actually reduce congestion. This is an example from Austin, and that works very well with US decision makers. Okay, last part, going to the station design. What we always say, because the most powerful connection is the one between cycling and active modes and the transit station. always put your active modes first. So the main entry routes and main entry points to the station is where you want to connect to your bike network. That's also where you want to concentrate bike parking, and like the connection with buses and also with the park and ride. Of course, they are important, especially also in the North American context, but where you can put them on the side, so that you have like a main entry point into the station. Even better, especially from a social safety point of view, but also about making it an attractive environment, is actually to increase the density around the stations. So TOD, you get more eyes on the street, you get a better environment for people to wait. Maybe there's a small restaurant or a shop that you could go to. You could combine kind of your trips and then see if maybe the other end of the station can maybe work more as a transfer area where you have these other connections. So simple example of the Netherlands, the station in Apeldoorn, where they have this front and back approach. So you have this big public square in front of the station. You have your bike parking on that side, but also on the other side, because it's not always easy to go under the station. Bus stops to the right, and on the other side of the tracks is where people can park their cars. So you really need to think about what is kind of the part that's really public space, where are my transfer facilities, and how to best organize these things. And it's really interesting that on the right side you see the current situation where we have this beautiful public space with a bicycle corridor going to the station, and now we're actually back where we were like 100 years ago. Kind of before the rise of the automobile. In between, there were lots of cars in front of the station, but after 100 years, we learned that maybe what we see on the right is actually the better way to do it. And what's really important, you want to minimize waiting times. You have to align timetables between the bus and the train, and so on. But user experience is also a really important part. So if an environment is really unpleasant, it seems to people that they have to wait longer. So time seems to take longer. But if you are in a really pleasant environment, times actually seems to take shorter. So you don't notice that it's actually already waiting for a while. And often there's a lot of focus in countries that are starting to promote cycling only on kind of make it safe and also able. We have to have a direct route. It has to be easy to use. But in the end, if you want to keep people cycling and keep people happy and really kind of invite them to cycle, it's also about the design and the whole experience. And that in the end will kind of make their behavior really structural and change their behavior really in a structural way. So some examples, actually example of Naples, where they really researched this really well. Here they put a lot of investment in the quality of the stations, where they invited all kinds of different artists to actually design the station. So you're quite a nice example. But what they also did is that they also researched what this meant for their catchment area. So on the left, the blue circle, you see a station that wasn't redone yet. And there the average walking time to the station was 12 minutes, like a small catchment. And on the right, you see the station that I just showed. And the average walking time to the station almost increased twofold after they had done the station. And also what they also saw is that actually much more women use the station as opposed to the old station. So if you look at the design, improve the experience, create a nice trail to the station, this increases your catchment. And this doesn't only have to be these big gestures, these very more expensive and beautifully done stations. This can also be with all kinds of very small interventions. So this is a very small transit station in the Netherlands where they just did some very simple design principles. So clear the area around the station, so no cars or buses parking just right next to the station, but make a small square. They have a visual marker. It's like a combination of like a work of art with also an information panel showing the timetables. You have a small kind of area where you can sit if you wait, and all like the things like ticket machines, the information panels, they are put to the side, and this creates a really pleasant, not too busy environment that welcomes people to the station. So I think also thinking about these really easy design principles is really important. And also the bike parking is just next to this, next to these panels. And of course, and then I will stop. It's about thinking about the whole chain. So it's not about the bicycle infrastructure. It's not about only about the nice station design, but also service. If you can repair your bike at the station, that's really nice. It's also extra services in terms of bike share. Also thinking about the last mile, which is really important. That the wayfinding is really clear. Can I find the bike parking at the station? Where can I rent the bike? What is the route where I can continue? So it's the whole picture and package that you need to think about. So in the end, if we work on all those things, we can improve the transit trip from home in a really spectacular fashion. And in the end, if we are at home and if we are at our destination, our value of time on the y-axis is the highest. And everything in between can be a bit of a hassle. So it takes more effort, lower value of time. But if we make the areas around our stations denser, bring those destinations closer to the station, that I don't have to do my last mile anymore, then of course I have a higher value of time for a longer time. If we improve the first mile, improve the timetable connectivity between bus and train, or make directer trails and more pleasant trails to the station, I can leave my home later and I get to the station faster. I have a longer value of time at the beginning. But in the end, and that's an important message also, if we can make everything nicer, being on the train nicer, waiting at the station, making more pleasant, but also getting to the station in a better way, in a more attractive environment, and also kind of the value of time of traveling itself increases and makes your overall trip faster. So it requires playing chess on a lot of boards, but in the end, the overall result can also be pretty spectacular. So this was my talk for today. And I think the idea is to do maybe 2 or 3 more clarifying or brief questions if there are already in the chat. And then we do Ruben's talk, and after Ruben's talk, we can also do maybe a bit more of a discussion also related to the questions and the issues you raised at the beginning.
So Thomas, I see just one question or a couple comments, but one in particular. It looks like there's maybe a couple more showing up. But one was in reference to that station that you showed that separated kind of the uses or organized the uses. Is just that in Florida we want to see more shade, especially during the summer months. But I think that's something that is definitely possible within that design that you're showing of being able to add canopies and structuring the space to make it pedestrian friendly as they wait for the vehicles.
Definitely, I think of course you always have to adapt your design to the local context. But I think the point I wanted to make is that you really want to have this kind of reception area. So it's not like all your transfer facilities next to the tracks, which create like a not a very pleasant environment, but you really should work on kind of having a reception area where people feel welcome and kind of entering the station.
Great. And it looks like John Mark dropped in some pictures and explanations of the accessing that the Boca Tri-Rail station that we can use as a reference. But it looks like Louis Merlin has raised his hand, so if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Do you only want to do clarifying questions? Because mine is more substantive. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Either clarifying or whichever question or however you want to phrase it is fine.
One thing that I've noticed is that here in the United States, a lot of times transit agencies consider themselves to only be about running trains and buses, and therefore they don't think that investing in pedestrian or bicycle infrastructure is part of their scope. Have you had similar challenges in other countries, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, I think a good question. I think potentially it can be their biggest growth market for new customers. So I think, and of course there are more challenges given the land use that you have in a North American context. So of course there are differences, but it can really be a growth market. So in that sense, also kind of counting the number of people that go to and from the station at such a location, I think it's really important. And especially thinking about the bus network, it can also improve your operational efficiency. So what we've seen a lot in the Netherlands that bus operators increased their stop distances, which of course led to faster travel times. This increased the ridership, but also because you need less buses to run one line, it also increased their operational efficiency. And of course, I know that sometimes in the US context, the bus also has more of a, how do I say that, a function for specific groups that face challenges, like elderly people and so on. And in the Netherlands, we see that especially you could say the more commuter-oriented bus network and connecting this with the bike is a very successful combination, also in terms of revenue and ridership. So I think in that sense, and of course, I would urge the transit agencies to look like for what are the quickest opportunities, and this should be the areas with already kind of a favorable land use, maybe a big mall that attracts a lot of people. So what are kind of the most interesting points to focus on, and then really focus on this local connectivity.
So it looks like we had another question, and I'll just read it out loud for you real quick. It starts with a statement. I noticed a lot of facts are not being mentioned. Many examples are based in Netherlands situations and Netherlands cultures. The culture of biking in the US and Florida is different, scale, weather conditions, temperature. Do you speak to users and potential users in Florida? So it sounds like how do we develop a system that is that works within the context of South Florida, I think is kind of the part of that question.
It's maybe good to come back to this question at the end as well. But the only thing I want to say, in the Netherlands, it also rains a lot, and people still cycle. In the Netherlands, when the automobile rose after Second World War II, levels of cycling dropped dramatically. Yeah, and then as a result of really deliberate policy, those numbers went back up again. So it's not a thing about culture. I would say it was really the result of deliberate policy. The big challenge, of course, if you compare, or the two big challenges, if you compare the US and especially the Florida context with the Netherlands, is of course the land use and also the weather. But I think the weather can be overcome by smart design. And maybe Ruben also has some comments on that later on.
Thank you, Thomas. I don't see too many other questions right now, so maybe we can transfer over to Ruben's presentation and then have any more questions for him in particular, and then both you and Thomas as well.
Yes, thank you, James. Then I will pick up and get my slides on the screen. One moment. So I'm gonna change to that. I need to make it in the full presentation mode. Here we are. I think everybody could see it now. When not, please say so. Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation, of course, to speak here. And I think I will pick up right where Thomas ended. Thomas got it more from the theoretical point of view with some examples at the end, and I will pick up with some examples and have some theory within it as well. Well, interesting to know for you and for me, of course, is that it was just 2 years ago, just before we had Corona. It was normal time to drive around, to go around. That I visited, especially here, this area of Florida with my family. So for me, it's also a sort of coming back again, but now on a digital way to Florida. So I know something of the environment, and I don't know especially all these train stations and locations, but I have been there traveling throughout Florida. So that's I think good to see what are the local backgrounds. Maybe then a little first about me, like Thomas also interested himself or got himself into the line. My name is Ruben Loendersloot. I'm an expert cycling and mobility, working for the company called Loendersloot International. It was grown up from the company Loendersloot Group, which is now focusing on the Dutch market, and Loendersloot International is picking up on the international market. Next to that, I'm voluntarily the chairman of the Dutch Cycling Embassy. You spoke to Chris Brundtlet, which is one of the employees of the project management part of the Dutch Cycling Embassy. And I'm also a partner in the Dutch Bicycle Center, which is located in Nijmegen in the east of the Netherlands. We've been always, since I've started, being a strong advocate for cycling and green mobility, and we are currently busy in the Netherlands and all around the world with all kind of cycling projects, but also sustainable mobility projects. And what's interesting, of course, to know is that we do it also from a city which is known from its cycling culture. It was the host of VeloCity 2017, the city of Nijmegen. And of course, with our Dutch experience, we take a certain look on how to go on with cycling and the connection to other modalities like bike train. But it's not that we only did it and do it in the Netherlands. So also the different backgrounds and different cultures, they are important to us. So we've worked in Copenhagen, but also in Bogota, in Colombia. And what we did there was not only, let's say, making the concept, but especially also doing the implementation, communication, and try to change the behavior, because it's not only about infrastructure, but it's also a lot about changing the behavior. So what could help us thinking with you, that would be the fact that we are an international team. So it's not only Dutch policymakers, but we have people from Brazil, which are living in the Netherlands now, and from Italy, from all parts of the world. So that gives, let's say, the Dutch look with a different background, and that makes it happen very easily. We go to the content from today, and it is the bike train multimodality. I took my part of this presentation, of my part of this hour, and the way we are going to take a look on the real possibility to make that. And I think the first important question is already shown by these pictures. Would you like to have a train where you can take maybe 1 or 2 bikes, like you see left above? It's one of the Dutch trains. You also saw it in the presentation of Thomas. Is it the way they do it in, let's say, countries around us, like in the Czech Republic or in Germany or in France, where you have a lot of cycles in the trains, but they are mainly focused then on, let's say, tourism or track riders? Or do you offer, let's say, the bike when going off the train and getting onto the station? So I think bike train multimodality is a very interesting subject to discuss in a broader way. It's not only like, okay, you take your bike on the train, or it's not only we have bikes on the station, it's just what is going in the local circumstances. And I think to have a good view on that, it's important to get your goals clear before anything is going to happen, because it does matter a lot if you think, or you have the idea, or if you did the research, if the use of the bike would be functional in the view regarding to the station, or is it more recreational? And the El Rio bike path, for instance, is I think mainly now used for recreational use. It's getting more functional use, but recreational use. This kind of cyclists have another connection to the train than the functional bike rider. The second question, which should be solved before you make any step on getting further with bike train modality, is which problem should be solved. I mean, okay, you could say there is no problem because we have parking spaces and everybody will come to the train station by car. But the question is, of course, is that desirable for the long term? Is it that you only would make more parking spaces if you would offer more parking spaces, or would you like to make a, let's say, sustainable change in the cities or in the surroundings around the stations? Then also an important question, what we always take a look at the Netherlands, do you know your, and I have it in between brackets, your potential customers? Because before you don't know anything about them, you cannot make the right decisions. If you don't know where your travelers are coming from, then it's very difficult to offer the right solution for bike train modality. Even in the Netherlands, we see it sometimes with some bus lines, although Thomas said like they are successful. There are also examples of facts where, let's say, bike stalls in connection to bus lines are not so successful. So it's very important to know where do you customers come from and do you know them, what they want? And also, what kind of travelers would you and could you expect on your train line? If it's more, let's say, commuters, then you need another solution, of course, then you have more recreational use of the train line. Then I think it was Mr. Merlin who already put this question on, and that's how is the connection between the different stakeholders. In the Netherlands, of course, the Dutch state railways are running only the trains, but they see the importance of the bike. But as a fact, they are not building the cycling stall, the bike parks and the bike stalls. It's mainly the municipalities together with the rail infrastructure provider and, of course, also the Dutch state railway. But it's not the fact that it's only the state railway who makes all the bike facilities. A good cooperation between the different stakeholders is thereby very important. And then, last but not least, in getting your goals clear, is there a long-term vision? It's a question which I propose to you because I think first these things need to be solved. If there's no long-term vision regarding mobility, then it's maybe not the best plan to directly work on a lot of bike facilities in bike stalls if there are no good feeder bike lanes to stations, because then it's still not possible to come with a bike to the train station. So the next step in the discussion around bike train mobility is, of course, which step would you like to make? Is it because there are not so much bikers, the bike on the train? You can do it when you don't have that much commuters who would like to go with their bike to the station and from the point of destination go to their work or wherever they go? Or is it more that people would like to just jump on and jump off and get on every station a bike sharing? I must say that the organized bike sharing, like I called it, the OV Fiets, the public transport bike in the Netherlands, is very successful. It's combined with the agreements you have with the Dutch state railways. If you have a normal ticket, you can also use this organized bike sharing, and it's very successful. But of course, you see also the free float bike sharing and the free float other sharing systems are coming up. So it's very interesting because then you don't need to do anything in the trains, on the trains, and on the platforms. Next step is also that it's very important to know about amounts. What is what you could expect today? What is what you could expect in 5 years and in 10 years? Because that makes sense how to change your schemes regarding running the trains, but also regarding having enough bike park facilities. And the question, of course, which should be solved. Is it only the transportation company, or is it the transportation company, the train company, or is it the government, or is it a certain working together? And I think working together is always the best solution, because then you both have a interest. I make a small in-depth analysis. I think every station has its local circumstances. Every station on the line has a different background, a different position in the network, and is in a different city. So what is the function per station? Is it one more a destination station, or is it more an origin station? That has a lot of effect on using bikes and where using the bikes. I think that it's not only about bikes, because I think especially offering multimodality to travelers can be a good solution. So it can be that you go to your original station, you go by bike, and at the destination station you may take a Uber, or you get a taxi, or maybe step on a bus, or even you could walk to your destination. So I think that it's not only about bikes, but it's very especially on multimodality. And then I think cost-benefit analysis is very important to make it. Interesting thing is that everybody thinks like, okay, cost-benefit analysis regarding cycling is always working very well in the Netherlands, but I know that one of the proud members of the Dutch Cycling Embassy, the organization which is called Decisio, did also some research and cost-benefit analysis in America, and found out that even there, investing in cycle infrastructure, cycle stalls, and the bike train connection is still very good. What also good is to know with your more in-depth analysis is what is the possession of cyclists versus shared cycling. So how many people really own a cycle and should be taken into account when organizing all facilities around stations. If there are not so much people owning their own cycle, then shared cycling could be a good solution, or even a better solution. And you should know this in advance before starting to do anything in your station areas. I took for me as an example, which is just a little above the area where we're talking about today, but for me it was an interesting station, and it's the Boynton Beach station. You see it here. It's close to the Highway 95, which we drove as well 2 years ago. And what you also see is in the environment, you see quite a lot, especially on the east side of the Highway 95, a lot of normal houses. And we see some housing blocks and some supermarkets on the more western side. But what you see is that the station is very isolated. You can go there really only good by car. And with a bike, especially when you live in one of these houses, it's very difficult to come there. And that is, of course, making it a little unattractive to go by bike there. And as an example from the other side, I think, oh, well, I have first Boynton Beach, and then I go to the examples other side. Here is more in depth. You see the Boynton Beach station. I think that in general, the facilities are quite okay. You have a good stairs, it's a good parking facilities, and the only thing what you see is there are only racks for 5 or 6 bikes, which also suits to the situation, because like I said, it's quite impossible or almost impossible to come on an attractive way with a bike to this station. Well, a little of the same is, of course, by the Boca Raton station. But the interesting thing, of course, is here is already one bike lane is already implemented, and it's a very important one, an important one which connects at least north and south to this station. So that's already a different point of view. I come back to the Boynton station later. First, I would like to just give you some impressions, and In the meanwhile, I would say always be inspired, but don't copy, because the circumstances are totally different. I'll give you some examples to give a sort of feeling of what it can bring. Here you see the most famous, I think you have seen it even in America, but nevertheless, I just thought I show it, the most famous bike park facility in the Netherlands, meanwhile. And I think even worldwide is this the situation in Utrecht with 12,500 bike racks. So for 12,500 bikes are possibilities there. It's an enormous situation. You cannot compare it. But the interesting thing is, and that is also what Thomas said, like this, we didn't get all this bike. We didn't take all the bikes here because we would like to have them, but all the people would like to come with the bike because it's the attractive, safe, direct way to come to the station, and you can even literally park under the station. So it's the most attractive and even quite cheap way of getting to the station. In Groningen, it's a little smaller sized, but still quite big. You see nothing or almost nothing. You see that there is a place in the front of the station, and underneath that there are the bikes. So that gives very nice open space. Houten, I will show it later. Houten is a middle-sized or a small-sized city with only 40,000 inhabitants, and has directly under the train line, as you see, also the bike park facilities. Then I come to the point where I compare both stations, just to give you an idea. This is the city of Houten, within the middle, the train station. And what you see, I think if I move my mouse, you still see it. My mouse is moving now from the left to the right. This looks like a street, is a street, but is a street only for bikes. So what you see is that the main goal, the main reason to come to the station is the bike. It was made attractive, and you see that around it all housing areas are developed. Here we see again the Boynton station. What you see is that there's of course a lot of room for the cars, but it's not only in front of the station. What you also see, it's almost impossible, or let's say a challenge, to get from the west side or the east side, sorry to say it, the east side to get to the west side. So even if you arrange all night bike stalls and bike park facilities, still I think a very important issue is that routes towards your station should be okay. And also, if you want to go work with bike sharing schemes or fixed schemes, then at least the environment should be that attractive, like Thomas also said in his presentation, that you also could go on a safe way and attractive way to the station. Well, one other example, you may know it maybe, and you may have heard it, but it's the big ones, is Amsterdam, of course. So that's why I skip it very fast and I just go to a smaller station. And here we're talking about a city of 13,000 inhabitants. And what you see is the first thing you meet when you go to the tracks are the bike stalls on a simple way, but also with enough space. To make a comparison a little more to the situation in Florida, we have the train station here in Zandvoort, which is at the seaside. And what you see there is a very open public space, especially for pedestrians and cyclists. And you see almost no cars around the station. What is being done here is that the bike park facilities are in or at the back of the building. And what is important here is, I think, as a comparison, is that you see that the public space around the station is very pedestrian friendly. So it's not only about making the connection with the bike, it's also making the environment around the station and also furthermore attractive. At least we could say that in a range of about 1 to 4 or 5 kilometers, the bike can be a very good alternative and to the car, and also a very good alternative to the car. Within distances of 1 kilometer, walking is of course a good solution. Well, because I had not so much time today, I do my takeaway message very shortly. I think that if you do a good cycle network around your station, then you have a good catchment area for new customers. The accessibility to your station is very important. If you are choosing for, let's say, bike schemes, or if you found out of your research that people are coming by bike, in both ideas, it's important that the accessibility is good. The possibility to take the bike to the train can be interesting, of course, in the moment that you see that the amount of cyclists taking their bike with a train is not that big. If it's going to be a success, then you have a real problem, because then you never have enough places on the train for bikes. Therefore, I see very good chances with shared bike schemes or other ways of shared mobility. Very good also to know what are your target groups, not only today, but also for the next years. Is it maybe the changing minds from younger people and their view towards mobility, which is not always the car? It's good to know how this is changing, how society is changing, and to act on that. And I think very important, I just showed you some examples where we worked on, and together with my other Dutch colleagues, we can help you to design and implement this. Here, one last interesting bike train combination. This is a bike bridge which is attached to the train bridge in the city of Nijmegen. And on the right, you see the train running into the station, and the bikes are just going on the next way. So that's a different way of different view on bike train combination. But I think the sentence below that is, I think the most important. It's not about the destination, but it's about the road towards it, which means do a very good in-depth analysis with the first a theoretical part, which Thomas introduced, and then the more practical questions which I introduced. That's it from me. If you have any questions, I'm open to that. And if you cannot ask them today, then feel free to send me an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. I see one question that came in early, and it looks like Thomas might have helped answer, but it's asked if you could elaborate on the free float bike sharing model versus the organized bike sharing model.
I don't get this question really well. What was the question about? What would you like to know?
They wanted to understand the differences. You mentioned earlier in your presentation a free float bike sharing idea versus an organized bike sharing model,
Yeah.
and just wanting to understand a little bit of the differences between the two.
The free float bike system is like you book it on your phone, and the bike will be available or not on the station, depending how many people came to the station, how many bikes are still there. And the organized bike system is more that you take a bike from a stall or from a sort of, we call it a rental company, but it's not a rental company. It's part of the Dutch State Railways. But you can get a bike there, and you have to book it with your ticket. So it's a different way of organize it, because the free float, you're never sure that all bikes will be available there on that moment. And with the organized bike scheme, that they are mainly available, or when not, then you know it in advance. So it's organized versus you're not sure that there is a bike.
Let's see here. It looks like Eric notified that we have about 2 minutes left. If anybody has a quick question, if they want to raise their hand real quick, that might be a little bit faster to get a question in before Eric moves us back into the main group.
Yeah, maybe James, I would also be interested because there were also some comments. The Netherlands is not Florida, and vice versa. But I would be curious, kind of what people heard from the talks of Ruben and I today. What do you think is kind of what are the quick wins or easy takeaways that you could also implement in the context in the Palm Beach area?
Well, and right after that, it looks like we have Paul that just asked, how does your panel feel the prevalence of motorized electric bicycles impact current discussions about level of service, safety, infrastructure needs, and policy? Example, the electric bike can go up to 20 miles an hour. And even this webinar is titled as the non-motorized. So I guess there's the questions of how those that the e-bike integrates into part of the discussion. And we have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, maybe a brief reaction. I think for the North American context, the e-bike is actually really interesting because it allows you to travel longer distances. So in terms of the more spread out land use, it offers opportunities. But of course, it also brings along some more design challenges in terms of how you design your multi-use paths. For example, combining bike and pedestrians will then be more of a challenge. So it creates new things to think about, but I think in essence it offers interesting opportunity.